basically we are beginning to enter a period of more obvious hot totalitarianism. Hot totalitarianism, I would like to call it, rather than cold, in a similar way to Cold War and Hot War. But our society is becoming more like how Philip K. Dick envisioned society becoming in his novel A Scanner Darkly, and it is becoming eerily similar to that particular tale. So basically this is the most important era in the implementation of the plot for world dominion that the Alumbrados began during the late 1490s. I'm unsure of how they link back to the Templars. I'm not sure if it is completely that way or they are in fact apart from the Templars. Indeed, there are some that believe that the Alumbrados, which means the illuminated, they were the Illuminati and they became the Jesuit order. That they descended from the Templars via Order of the Calatrava and Order of the Montesa, and thence from being the Illuminati, Alumbrados, the illuminated, they thenceforth became the Jesuit order. But I don't know if the Alumbrados are 100% Templar in their history and how their order came together. I don't know if there's a direct correlation between the Alumbrados and the Templars, but what I do know is that the world order is going to be a Romanoid Slavocracy, and therefore the Roman Empire has never ended. It's simply different people who are now controlling the strings. It's a different group, and all of the despotic attempts at world and European first dominion have been Romanoid, especially beginning with the Roman Empire and then the dominion of the Roman Catholic Church, and now the Romanoid Slavocracy, which is being brought in by the winds of the ultra-aristocracy through the Jesuit Illuminati psychiatric axis. And it is interesting how the powers that be that are keeping the papacy as it is, and indeed the papacy remains the focal point, and Rome remains the heart in many senses of the quest for the New World Order, just as it has been important for despotism for over 2,000 years. And indeed, Philip K. Dick's statement that the empire never ended and that time stopped in 70 AD and Roman despotism simply continued, that idea is completely true. That cannot be fought off. But what we are witnessing now is the technocracy that is being implemented is that envisioned by the Illuminati, that envisioned by Weishaupt. He pretty much took the ideas of the reductions that the Jesuits had been practicing for the 200 years previously, and he added a technocratic element to it. A good experiment of that was the Soviet Union, and indeed the technocratic influences we see in our society today are basically thoughts of Weishaupt, who believed that he could add to the Jesuit order a priesthood of engineers and savants. Thus, the Illuminati added a technocratic edge to the religious elements of Jesuitry, even though the Jesuits are, more into Baphomet than they are Christ, as Christianity is only for the normal people, not for the ultra-aristocracy or the Jesuits or the Illuminati. Christianity is mass brainwashing for the people. So the Jesuit order does bridge religious theories, I suppose, to the Illuminati, introducing more scientific theories. And of course, this links into characters such as Malthus and Gobineau, who linked biological theories of ultra-aristocratic, social Darwinistic superiority over the poor, and mixed it with the divine right of the aristocracy to rule the poor. Thus, with the Jesuit Illuminati, the Illuminati are merely an offshoot of the Jesuits. They are one organization, but the Jesuit order is the main constituent part, but the Weishaupt Bavarian Illuminati is the technocratic element, which has itself led into the psychiatric element of the Jesuit Illuminati psychiatric axis, as I like to call it. I believe we have the ultra-aristocracy, who are the Slavocrats and shall be the class that shall enslave us, but the Jesuit Illuminati psychiatric axis is the vehicle by which they are going to be able to achieve global dominion. So it's not the Vatican New World Order. That's not the way to put it. It's not the Catholic New World Order. That isn't the way to put it either. But indeed, so the psychiatric element, I believe, became deeply involved in the Jesuit Illuminati thrust for world dominion around between 1895 and 1905, as we began to see more theories such as Gobineau's theories, and of course the origins of the Thule Society and the beginning of eugenics. So eugenics really was had a very interesting beginning, because at the beginning of eugenics, the meetings of eugenic circles were usually a lot of Anglican priests and a load of psychiatrists. But yeah, so the psychiatrists have the job of keeping down those who could threaten the Jesuit Illuminati quest for world dominion, the ultra-aristocratic quest for world dominion. And that is because the truth is in the asylums. It's the schizophrenics, the neurotics, the psychotics, with their visions and prophecy, who are the only ones who can successfully take on the Jesuit Illuminati axis. Thus, the psychiatrists have become one of the most important assets to the Jesuit order for keeping control, as the Catholic Church once reigned kept control through accusing its opponents of being heretics or witches. The Jesuit order now keeps its opponents at bay using psychiatry. There is no difference. It is one continuum. Psychiatry is nothing more than the Spanish Inquisition revamped for the postmodern world. And the Jesuit order are well aware that they have implemented new Inquisition and will continue with that Inquisition. And it is we schizophrenics that are now drugged out of our eyeballs to try and dull us completely. I've realized that they are trying to completely control my brain, that they just simply do not want me to speak. Us truthers are being cast out of society. First, not only because of schizophrenia, but because of being brave enough to speak in a conspiratorial fashion. It's not a very thankful life. Indeed, it's constant persecution, and being labelled with schizophrenia, I'm completely open about talking about it, but being labelled with it, people will immediately distrust my theories. because I have schizophrenia. If I didn't have schizophrenia, they wouldn't mistrust my theories so much. So immediately, the psychiatric movement is able to keep the Jesuit Illuminati axis in power, because people will now no longer listen to me simply because a psychiatrist has decreed me schizophrenic. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe schizophrenia exists. There are many mental illnesses being created now that I believe do not, but schizophrenia certainly does. And as I have said, I have no problem talking about it, and I believe this is part of the revolution. This is part of my revolution. This is part of my war against the system. And because of the nefarious nature of the psychiatric establishment, I am labelled as a crank, and thus I'm too bonkers who do not listen to my theories. Thus, any bid of mine to spread the truth is immediately shot in the foot. So the system is still completely Romanoid. So even though it's different group heading at the top, it's the ultra aristocrats, a specific group of ultra aristocrats that have been genetically engineering themselves and selectively breeding themselves for basically 1,000 years. And before that, it was potentially the Merovingians. So certain powers, are always seeking world dominion, but what I believe is the main plot for world dominion is whatever the Alumbrados came up with in the 1490s, and that's what was reinstituted by Weishaupt with the formation of the Bavarian Illuminati. And the Jesuits merely got involved with the Catholic Church to aid the Genoese oligarchy and the ultra aristocracy, and simply used it for their own benefits, because when the Catholic Church turned on the Jesuits and suppressed them, the Jesuits took their revenge in a very, very powerful way and basically destroyed the Catholic Church's ability to collect tithes or finances. They bankrupted the Catholic Church completely, and thus were able to completely control the Vatican, and have done since 1814. Pope Pius VII, after 5 years of resistance, finally gave in to the Jesuits and restored them to their position in 1814, after the Jesuit Illuminati had done their work on him. And every white pope since Pope Pius VII has been a puppet of the Black Pope, the Black Pope being the head of the Jesuit order. And the head of the Jesuit order right now is one Arturo Sosa, S.J. He is potentially, along with the Grey Jesuit oligarchical leader Pepe Orsini, they are possibly the two most powerful human beings on Earth. It's very difficult to find out many details about the Alumbrados, but it is interesting how, even though the Alumbrados were persecuted a little by the Inquisition, they themselves use tactics such as their own Inquisitions. So all of the methods of despotism that keep being created by all these different groups are Romanoid. It's always a Romanoid system. And back to psychiatry, it's become similar in a sense to the confessional. How the Jesuits used to gain information through the confessional, they now gain through psychiatrists, because sometimes we foolishly open our mouths to psychiatrists and tell them our anti-government or anti-Jesuit Illuminati views, and that gets into the system, circulated, and immediately we end up on MI5's watch list. And potentially in a psychiatric establishment. And so it is as I said, I always say the truth is in the asylums. I hear more truth from the ravings of a manic neurotic than I do from any person sitting in the street out there, walking around. If you're sitting on the floor, you're probably quite an interesting person. Doesn't matter. Yeah, whoever's just walking around outside right now, I'd much prefer to listen to a maniacally ranting. There's just those shards of truth in their visions. In our visions, should I say. And that is why the establishment fears us and shall continue to. But indeed, back to the White Pope. The White Pope must remain. The papacy shall remain, as it legitimizes the Jesuitical rule over Britain and America, which are the most important countries militarily and financially. And since 1213, these lands have been, and its population and their population's holdings and land have been in the hands of Rome, as they were conceded to Pope Innocent III by King John. And 1215, after the Magna Carta was torn to shreds, and by signing the Magna Carta, King John had broken the deal of concession with Pope Innocent III, and therefore was forced to concede the monarchy, the crown corporation, and the throne of Britain. Thus, Queen Elizabeth II is nothing more than a proxy of the White Pope being a proxy of the Black Pope. So the Jesuits are in control. The Jesuits keep their fiefdom, but the lands of Britain and America were pledged to the Pope forever. So this White Pope must be kept in position, because it legitimizes it. It might not be legitimate if the Jesuits were to remove the position of White Pope. It may not, the concessions may no longer be legitimate, so the Vatican must be kept as it is. The Curia is 100% Jesuit, so there is not much chance of anything happening in the Vatican that could do any damage to the Jesuit order, who are themselves in complete control of it. So that's about it for that, really. But it's interesting that the current Pope, Pope Francis, is the first Pope who is actually a member of the Jesuit order. Indeed, it seems there was a conspiracy, because I can't remember the name, but there was to be a Ghanaian Pope. But there was some sort of conspiracy hatched by Georgetown and the White House to put in position a Jesuit Pope, which means we may be entering a time of turmoil potentially. This may be the time when something erupts, as the Jesuit Illuminati psychiatric axis plan is gradually becoming more totalitarian outwardly, as I've stated at the beginning of this chat, with how society has become a mirror of the novel A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick. And as I've also mentioned, there are tunnels directly between Georgetown University and the White House, so most American geopolitical decisions are made in the tunnel. And there are tunnels running here from Hatfield House in Hampshire to Horton Down Biochemical Weapons Factory up onto Bowood House, where the MI6 war rooms are. And these tunnels began as Catholic monk holes and priest tunnels, and were gradually constructed by the rich Catholic dynasties operating underground, and were used by the Jesuits during their colonization of Britain between 1773 and 1815. just as they were taking over the papacy between 1773 and 1814. And indeed, I would say they had pretty much complete control over the papacy in 1814, but in 1870, with the passing of the rule of Papal Infallibility, they had complete domination, as now the White Pope was beholden to the Black Pope, and whatever the White Pope stated was now infallible and could not be disagreed with. Thus, the Black Pope could simply use the White Pope as a mouthpiece, and has been doing ever since 1870. And thus we see the plot by the Alumbrados coming into position. So it's very difficult to find out anything about what went on in the lodges of the Alumbrados in the 1490s, 1500s, 1510s, 1520s, before they emerged as the Jesuit order. And that is what is so thought-provoking. It's beyond contemplation, because we can't find it out, so all we can do is speculate. It's frustrating, but soon maybe it will be revealed. Indeed, by watching the activities of the Jesuit Illuminati psychiatric axis, we may begin to get some idea of the eventual program, which I believe to be universal reductions and Romanoid Slavocracy, which has always been the way in which Jesuit dominated society, such as the Paraguayan reductions have existed, and our new drug-addled reduction, which is mimicking A Scanner Darkly. And now I'm going to fade away.